And that's why, having platforms and systems in place that allow you to recover to new environments without having to have any of the old pieces is pretty important. And not having to then go figure out, okay, well, now it's all under a different subscription or it's in a new tenant. I've got to figure out how to stitch it all back together. That's our job. That our job is to make it so that when you move from like one tenant to another, you don't have to figure it out. We do that, the hard work for you, because you've got bigger, you probably have bigger problems at that point than having to want to figure out how to stitch your applications back together.
Welcome back, everyone. My name is Thomas, and I'm here with Thomas Bryant from Commvault, which we had already as a guest in this show before and had some interesting topics to talk about. So, Thomas, great to have you back. And obviously, can you introduce yourself just a little bit? So, for those who haven't seen the first episode, who you are and what you're doing.
Absolutely. So, hello, everybody. I'm Thomas Bryant. So, I'm a senior director of product and portfolio marketing here at Commvault. So, we focus on cyber resiliency solutions, and my area of focus specifically is really on kind of technical and some of the competitive marketing functions within our organization. So it's great to be here.
Awesome. And as far as I understand, you also come with a large background, obviously, on like IT operations and disaster recovery and things like that. I mean, we had this very good conversation about these kind of like cases before. So yeah, looking forward to this as well.
Yeah, it's been fun. I mean, not to go too deep into memory lane, but when I started in IT many moons ago, when the dirt was still fresh on the earth, I mean, the internet was still just kind of becoming a thing. And so I ran data centers for some pharmaceutical organizations, and then kind of did a lot of things in virtualization. So a lot of VMware, but a lot of Hyper-V as well. And through that, I got the opportunity to work with a lot of different companies and develop disaster recovery and site reliability before the whole SRE thing was ever a thing of just, how do we protect our environments? And as we've shifted technologies from kind of time to time, how do you keep those plans up to date? How do you develop things like incident response plans, things like that?
Yeah, no, again, super interesting background. And I remember the first episode, which was quite fun. And today, I mean, we're going to talk about a lot of like backup and disaster recovery for the cloud, but obviously also in general. Like, I think like it's very interesting. I mean, for everyone who is like born in the cloud, they probably haven't really experienced some of the stuff which we had to do in the on-prem world in the past. And how far we actually went there. So there were definitely some interesting concepts there of like making sure that our data is protected and that we could recover. And so, and then obviously we talked about, when we talked before this show, we actually like find it interesting how we actually get to this point in the cloud as well. So, yeah. So if we look at like, if you look at this, like, and I don't want to say it's the old way of doing things, but it's really because it's not true, right? It's like still a lot of companies are like doing this and probably keep doing this for a very, very, very long time. But like, so in a traditional way, when everything was like kind of like on-prem, how was the backup and disaster recovery? And I know that you also have some like terms by yourself as well for these kind of things.
I mean,
how was the world there?
It was interesting. I mean, when I look back, way back when I started back in kind of the late 90s, early 2000s, I mean, disaster recovery was at least for me, was starting to become a bigger and hotter topic. And most of those were around, our internet connectivity or our site goes down, and it started to evolve into all right, what happens if the smoldering crater, the building burns down or whatnot? And it really revolved around, all right, what do we need to do to have a copy of everything that we have, number one, off site? So that was shipping tapes off to Iron Mountain or somebody like that. And having big tape libraries and robots and things like that. And then slowly it evolved into disk-based backup. And I mean, I even look at things like 3211 that is like a standard industry thing for data protection now. Where did that come from? It came from a photographer of all things. Like, it has nothing to do with data protection originally, as best I can tell. It came from photography, of having multiple copies and multiple locations on different types of media. But with disaster, we never cared about things like the data itself. Like, we didn't have to worry about cyber attacks. I mean, we started to, but it was just, hey, site 1 is dead, and now we need to move to another site. What do we need to do there? People, process, technology to have, essentially a duplicate copy. And that was expensive. It was really expensive.
Yeah, you're actually an interesting point. It was more about like outages, right? Hardware failures, site failures, and all that. And it was really not like, no one really. I remember now, like when I go back and where we did a lot of work with, I did a lot of work in the SME space with like smaller customers there as well. We never did really think about, like, in that time, about cyber attacks. It was more or less really about like, hey, how can we recover after failure? How can we make sure that like no data is lost? And actually, like the tape thing you just brought up, I remember the time, and that makes me feel old. I didn't feel old for a very long time, but now I feel old. I remember like doing for these small, medium-sized businesses, and there was this. Obviously, we had already like a disk backup, but then the long-term backups were on tapes. And then I remember having some people actually taking the tapes and bringing it to an offsite location. In terms of, most of the time it was even a bank, right, and things like that.
Put it in the vault.
Which is interesting, like, especially because they did, then this was not a weekly thing, right? And like every month, or maybe even like, and the tapes go offline, and then there were like some tapes which was like a yearly thing. They put into the bank, and I'm like, what do you do with data which is a year old? Like, I mean, I get it. Maybe you need to have like recover something which was lost, like because you do some audit. But if a disaster strikes in that case, like it's like, we cannot go back.
How's that going to help you?
Yeah. So actually, like, fun things. But then it's interesting how good and far we actually came. Like we did from like simple file backup, and then some of the things, and then like people did not, like, at least you had the data and all that. But when it comes to like restoring things, it was actually at the beginning a lot of effort. But then these backup products or recovery products became so good that, like, hey, I want to restore application X.
Here
we go.
It used to be really hard. I mean, even in the DR world, I mean, you had to have the operating system. You had to have everything set up, because bare metal days, you weren't recovering the bare metal. You had to rebuild the OS, and then you would rehydrate the application on it. It's gotten so much better. I mean, especially with the advent of virtualization and things like Hyper-V. But even now with cloud, it becomes, in some ways, even easier, and in some ways a bit more complex.
Yeah, that's what I was just thinking, right? So like, this is actually the interesting step. As like, we were very comfortable at one point in the on-prem world with virtualization, and then we had very advanced backup and recovery products, which were like, okay, I want this application 10 minutes back, I want to go like an hour back, whatever. And you could easily do that, and it would do that in a very holistic way. That, I don't need to think about, okay, these 3 servers, and then I need to do this database and everything. Like the software itself would take care of things like that, and it made it very, very easy, in my opinion. And then now going to this cloud world with, like, I'm looking a little bit on the, like, okay, what does Microsoft offer there? We kind of like offer some native tooling, which is pretty, which I would say is pretty good. But it's, again, like, you need to be aware of actually what you want to restore. And you need to know what you need to restore, right? Like, you need to go, okay, I need this VM, I need this database, and like, you need to have a plan. You need to know, like, the product can back up and can restore, but what and how the application works together, I think that is not something we figured out in the, like, from our native tooling in the cloud yet.
It's gotten in some ways easier because now in some ways everything is essentially code, right? There isn't necessarily bare metal we're worried about. So, Microsoft does a great job of things like APIs and providing access to be able to get access to all of the data and to get access to the different components. But now there's new problems, there's new challenges that we have to solve. One of the biggest ones that I see in the cloud is just when we move to the cloud and you think about a traditional app, it used to be 3-tier architecture, right? There was some load balancers, some web servers, and a database or a database cluster in the back end. And now when I look at a cloud-based application, there could be dozens, hundreds of microservices, and they're all connected through VXNets and different components and different services within Azure. And it's made things easier, but it's also now made things in some ways potentially more complex when you're trying to do something like a disaster recovery
Yeah.
or a cyber recovery, because there's so many pieces. And
Yeah.
they could be very distributed across multiple tenants, could be across multiple geographic sites and availability zones and whatnot. And I would say one of the other challenges that we see with customers is just it's not even so much like the traditional disaster recovery piece. It some cases it's things like misconfigurations with the advent of code of CI/CD pipelines and SREs and DevOps. People are pushing code into production 50 times a day, 100 times a day, and somebody makes a mistake. How do I roll my entire environment back? Because it's not just rolling back that one piece of code. It's now proliferated across my entire cloud infrastructure.
Yeah, it's interesting. There's like I can talk about this, but like we have like obviously similar discussions within Microsoft as well, right? But what we do changes to the platform,
Yeah.
and something goes wrong. And again, as you said, like we do this multiple times a day, and like there's a lot of changes happening. What do we do if something doesn't work out as well? And so that's obviously also something our customers have to deal with. I mean, in our case, there is this interesting, and I think there's a public talk about this a little bit from our CTO, Mark Rusinovich, who is actually like bring this up, is that, hey, there was like, he brought up an example of a failure, right? Obviously, we have testing and all that in place.
Yeah.
And then we do these staged rollouts. And then what happened was actually that, well, if you do deploy this to, let's say, 100 systems, no error. Do this to 500 systems, no error. But then once you hit like 2,000 or something, then suddenly there was the problem, right? So something you couldn't really test before. But then obviously, okay, so now how do you go back into the good state? So there's a lot of work inside Microsoft going on. But again, like as you brought up from like the customer side perspective, I mean, it's literally the same thing. Probably not as the scale as a Microsoft, but
Yeah.
it's actually the exact same way of like, okay, I do changes. And then I think one point I want to highlight, because you brought this up, is the complexity in terms of, hey, it's not just about obviously the workload itself, also how things are connected together. Like
Yeah.
how quickly you brought up like VNets, right? But then
Yeah.
also potential pass services. Like
Yeah.
how quickly can I delete or do some misconfiguration on this? And then it's not just about, oh, I can just restore a VM. Yeah, well, doesn't help you in that case, right? You need to be do this. And I think it gets even worse if you do something on a subscription or tenant level. Even you can mess up things pretty badly.
Yeah, I mean, you can mess it up as fast as you can write the code for it. That's the efficiency and beauty of the cloud, is that it's so fast and efficient. But we're still humans, and we still occasionally make mistakes. And there's there's the other pieces too of like, well, you're not going to have just a secondary copy running in the cloud, like having a totally separate idle environment. I mean, again, in like your case, 500, 2,000 machines, that adds a lot of cost. And it brings its own complexity. So it's really, you have to think about, how do we do this efficiently, but how do we prepare to mitigate these sorts of issues when they come up? Not just cyber attacks, but just the human error element of things that can happen. And still have to worry, occasionally, somebody with a backhoe out there cuts off all of the internet connectivity for a data center. How do we deal with that too? So
Yeah.
it's same sort of problems, but they just kind of evolved like everything else, I guess.
Yeah, and I was just thinking, like, sometimes how good would it be to just be able to rewind back to a certain state?
Yeah.
So you see what I did there, right?
Oh yeah.
Um, so you were obviously, like, Commvault was working on something very, very interesting in terms of that state, which exactly helps. And I got when I heard about this and you told me about this, I got very excited about it, to be honest,
Yeah.
because it solves a lot of the challenges we have in the cloud in general when it comes to, like, making sure that everything can be restored really, really quickly. And maybe you can talk a little bit about this.
Yeah, I mean, so the whole idea around Cloud Rewind, so it came to us through an acquisition. We acquired a company called Appranix a while back, and we've continued to develop that capability and brought it into Commvault Cloud. But it's more than just being able to recover data. It's about being able to recover and rewind all of your cloud resources, all of your data, all of your applications back to the moment before you had it, whether it's an attack or a disaster or a code misconfiguration, without having to have any of the complexity of figuring out what pieces do I need to have. So part of it, when you first get going with the capability, it's a SaaS offering for folks. So if you want to go take advantage of it, you can get a free trial, of course. But essentially, the first portion of it is it will go out and discover and map all of your applications that you have. So you give it some credentials or keys. It will go out and learn what you have out there and build its own dependency map. So you don't have to go figure that out. And I think the most important part there is that it evolves over time. So where you may have a small app today and you roll it out to production tomorrow, and all of a sudden it starts to scale up, you don't need to worry about well, what do I have to go figure out which piece is here? Now it's here. And now there's 1,000 of them. It figures it out all the time. It's constantly looking at what you have and then allowing you to recover that essentially like with one click, or recover it as code.
Okay. I think that is also one of the key things, right? What you just said, like, at last was like, okay, recover as code. Because for me, like, one of the challenges, like, again, like, it's great that you can restore, like, VMs or
Yeah.
database or whatever, but as you said, like, all these things are basically linked together. And I'm like, going some scenario, someone does, like, something really bad, like, in a way that, like, deletes a resource group or even a subscription. So there was probably a lot of, like, services in there,
Yeah.
configurations, not just the application data, but the whole like, configuration of the infrastructure, let's say, was there as well. And as far as I understand, that's something you do restore as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, if I think about, gosh, I don't want to go into the OSI model here. If you think about all the different layers of an application, like starting at the basic stuff, right? You've got like VPCs and security groups, all these different components. You've got the networking, you've got the VMs, you've got maybe some Azure SQL or databases in there. You've got, just object level storage, the apps themselves. Heck, you probably even have things like, you may have custom DNS in there. You may have some
Mhm.
encryption and certifications and keys. A lot of what I just said there in that 10 seconds, it's not data. Like, you don't just go back up, backing up a VM or a file storage or object storage is easy. But like, how do you protect, certificates, and where do you go get those? It's different, and it's just a different methodology, but you also need to know which certificates to get and which encryption algorithms you're using. What portion of the DNS do I need to get to make this application work? It's not just like you just click a button. You need something that can continuously scan for these changes and look at them, and then be able to make that determination of, hey, these are the things that I need to get. This is like some of the drift analysis. Hey, these are the things that changed. We only need to get these because we don't need to go get everything every time, and make it simple. And I think the other piece too is, in the traditional world, there were like lots of agents and I don't know anybody that loves agents. Nobody wakes up and says, "Ooh, I can't wait to install another agent." In the cloud, we don't need those things anymore. So let's get rid of them. So everything should just be running continuously, looking and discovering dependencies, protecting our apps, and protecting what I call kind of the metadata, right? It's all the
Right.
configuration of the cloud and the app.
Yeah. Yeah, that's exactly like, so like the way I was always like thinking about this. And when we have this model, what we recommend to a lot of like our Azure customers is actually to use our concept of like landing zones, right? And that
Yeah.
means you build this little hierarchy of like different management groups, and then underneath these management groups you basically organize your subscriptions, and then in these subscriptions you have do certain like infrastructure pieces, or what you call metadata, like kind of
Yeah.
like linked to like the configuration, the services which need to be there, the VNets, the all the
Yeah.
stuff there. And then there is like obviously like we have different subscriptions. So there is like these shared infrastructure type of subscriptions where you
Yeah.
have, for example, for networking, where all the VPN stuff lives. So you have to centralize all that, right? The
Yeah.
hub kind of thing. And then you have the application or workload landing zones. And depending on how you look and organize yourself, you have these like, then you put these in a subscription. And so there's also obviously then you have VNets in there, you have
Yeah.
certain PaaS services in there, you have VMs, you have all this stuff. And
Security
then obviously,
groups. Yeah. Everything.
yeah, yeah, exactly. So everything is organized in this. And so my fear there is like always, okay, I mean, if someone deletes a VM, okay, I mean, there are backup tools like we have like
Yeah.
in the platform to
Yeah.
restore. But what if someone goes out and deletes whole production subscription? Obviously, you want to protect against this. You want to make sure that
Yeah.
it's not something simple to delete, but it happens, right? It's not
Yeah.
something which doesn't happen. So what then, right? And that's kind of
Yeah.
like, I think, where I see the power of this rewind functionality coming in
Yeah.
very, very big.
Absolutely. I mean, we've got a lot of customers. One that comes to mind, just I was talking with the other day. I mean, they've got over 1,400 different Azure resources across like 30 plus different subscriptions.
Mhm.
So there's hundreds of VMs. There's all kinds of managed data disks, scale sets, VNet, security groups, everything. Instead of having to do it with different bespoke tools or different pieces of code that they write themselves, that's the real power, is that you can take everything, put it into one place, and that now they don't have to worry about it. It's essentially lights out for them. It protects it. I think for them, they protect it every 15 minutes. And if they ever need to roll back, it's just a push of a button back to, what time do you want to recover to? And you have, not only do you get the benefits of like kind of that single click piece, but you also get the speed and flexibility of this of cloud, right? I mean, Azure has essentially seemingly limitless resources. So when they need to recover, whether it's to the same environment or to a different tenant, like they can make that decision and push a button, and they're up and running quickly, which is really a huge benefit that we see.
Yeah, I think that's another like very good point you just brought there, and I think that is also like some of the questions I have.
Yeah,
Um, that like restore to a auto subscription or to another tenant
yeah,
even. I think that to me was just like, when we talk about this, it's just like, wow, okay, this is really, really cool, because
yeah,
I imagine like in the terms of where for some reason you get attacked and you lose access to your tenant, like worst case, probably
yeah,
worst case scenario. And obviously like we at Microsoft, we have processes in place to help customers when they're under attacks and things like that,
yeah,
but you want to have obviously a plan of, okay, what do I do if everything is gone? And
yeah.
so I think that is super powerful. And so I'm happy that you actually brought this up, because this seems to be a very good capability. Um,
Yeah, I mean, Mike Tyson quote is, "Everybody has a plan till they get punched in the face," right? You have to have a plan for worst case scenario. I don't know who ever said it, but I totally buy into, like, you hope for the best, but you plan for the worst, and you have to plan for that scenario where you have no access to anything. And what do you need to, if you have nothing, how do you get back? Um, And that's why, having platforms and systems in place that allow you to recover to new environments without having to have any of the old pieces is pretty important. And not having to then go figure out, okay, well, now it's all under a different subscription or it's in a new tenant. I've got to figure out how to stitch it all back together. That's our job. That our job is to make it so that when you move from like one tenant to another, you don't have to figure it out. We do that the hard work for you, because you've got bigger, you probably have bigger problems at that point than having to want to figure out how to stitch your applications back together.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think so. There's a couple of questions which obviously come up with this because it sounds obviously very good. But one of the questions I would have is, okay, so when you said like we need to have a plan, like usually what I need to plan for is also where do I store that backup data? Like
Mhm.
where I need to have a place to store it. And obviously in this case, I want to make it very independent. So I think you just mentioned before, but like how does that work with Cloud Rewind? Do I need to like build already something by my own, or how does that
No,
work?
so you don't have to worry about that from that perspective. So we store the customer data in our tenant, so there's no risk of if they're attacked or their environment is hit, they don't have to worry about the fact that we're also getting hit because we're in a separate tenant and we have lots of security pieces in place. I mean, we make it as well so that you can't just go in and start deleting data from your own tenant, because worst case scenario, really, if you think about it, is not just that they get access to your tenant, but if they can log into, let's say, your backup provider, what's
Yep.
to stop them from deleting that data? How do you need to make sure that you have immutable and indelible copies of that data that can't be altered? And so
Yep.
we take care of that as part of our service platform, is that we provide them the ability to prevent those sorts of destructive events, but then also be able to, tell us where they want to push that data to. So it's very simple, very easy. Lots of things like multi-person authorization, all those kind of staple pieces that you expect us to have.
Nice. I think that's like that gives a lot of peace in mind, like because you don't need to like that was one of always the challenges, right? There was so much to think about, um, like where to back up. Not that you have the chicken and egg problem, not that it's also, especially when insecurity comes in as well. Like obviously, like that people when they do an attack, they also target obviously the backup data.
Yeah.
So all of that is obviously like that. Like not need to think about this, I think, is also a very huge win there as well.
Yeah, well, I think it's good that they think about it too, and I think it's important that folks that are watching this, they realize too that it is part of your responsibility, like as an end customer, to talk to your vendors about how do you secure the data and how do you protect it, because yes, we're kind of like that easy button, but you want to make sure that you have the peace of mind. I know it's I love like sayings, but it's the trust but verify piece of it, right? You want to know that we're doing all of those things in terms of 3, 2, 1, 1. We're keeping multiple copies and in multiple tenants, in multiple storage groups, in different geographically dispersed areas. And how do we make sure that that stays secure for you? Because if you're going to rely on somebody to bring your business back from the brink, you
Yeah,
better have a lot of confidence that they can do that for you successfully.
yeah.
I don't want to have to generate my resume as part of that process. So I
Well,
like to have that warm and fuzzy blanket to sleep well at night.
yeah. No, I completely get that. And I think also like with like Commvault also has that reputation as well, right? It's
Yeah.
not something where you would be like something a company which, yeah, well, we don't know if they can handle this, right? Like you have
Yeah.
been there for a very long time. Obviously that doesn't mean anything, but like the far as like talking with you and like looking at the solution, I think like, okay, you guys, you know what you're talking about. And so that's always great.
I
um
appreciate that.
yeah. The other thing which is interesting is now obviously like so one question came up like where do I store my data, but the other
Yeah.
one is also like, and I think you again you mentioned this now a couple of
Mhm.
times, but maybe you can talk a little bit more about this. Is like how, when we say we recover all this, right?
Mhm.
How does that process kind of work in terms of, okay, now you need to build it from scratch? Like, what are you basically doing there to make that happen?
Well, I mean, essentially, as part of the protection process from the cloud perspective, you're if you want to go granular, you can get in there and say, I want to, protect this and that, and this security group and this VNet and those sorts of things. Or you do it at kind of the application layer. And part of what we discover is that application and everything that's underneath it and all the dependencies. And so when you want to recover that, it's as simple as just a couple of clicks. If it's in place, it's really just a matter of, I can just say recover, or I can pick what day and time, or I can pick a different tenant where I want to recover it. But it's very simple and easy to basically go in and say, I want to recover an application, and I want to recover it in the same tenant or in a new tenant or in a new geo. And that's it. You don't have to worry about any of the plumbing, if you will. You don't have to stitch it back together. We just take care of all of it. It is the easy button for recovery.
Okay. And I guess you use like something as like infrastructure as code, like
Yep.
our APIs, our native APIs, to basically do the whole
Yeah.
restore on this.
Yeah, and we don't hide any of that from you. So, I mean, if you want to see what we're doing, you can see all of the code that we generate to be able to recover everything. So,
Huh.
as efficient as we are, we also want to be open and transparent so that
Yeah.
people can see exactly what we're doing in the process. There's, of
Yeah.
course, proprietary pieces that are doing like discovery mapping and stuff like that. But when
Yeah.
it comes to putting data, and metadata and different services back in place, yeah, we're leveraging the powerful APIs that Microsoft and Azure have for us.
Oh, nice. So basically, I could take basically the whole. Could get a kind of like a ARM template, infrastructure as code template for
Yeah,
my whole Azure environment, more or less. Like, let's put it like,
absolutely.
okay, okay.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it might be, tens of thousands of lines of code, but absolutely. We've had customers that have even gone from where they were doing it manually and they were writing the code, and they've gone in, and like I had one customer they had over 700,000 lines of code, and they saw like a 10x reduction just because of how efficient we are at
Oh,
being able to protect things. So
okay.
even there, it was just, look, you're doing it manually. Look, we make your code even more efficient for you.
Yeah. Yeah. That's interesting. So it could even be used by customers who have kind of like this brownfield scenario, who probably
Mhm.
haven't really done infrastructure as code, who just went out there and deployed things, and the thing grew and grew and grew.
Yeah,
They could basically leverage, again, I'm switching
yeah,
topics now, but it's like basically they could leverage you to like get like a nice template of their environment,
mhm,
how to actually do it as infrastructure as code. So
yeah.
even for that, it would be worth already doing the trial to
Oh,
just get,
absolutely.
I want to have a map out my environment,
Yeah.
uh,
I mean,
done by Commvault.
yeah, I mean, it's I go back to like my old Visio days. Back when I would do like mappings of networks, and it was only as current as when I push the print button, kind of a thing. In terms of like what my environment looks like. And when anybody goes out to the code, what you originally deployed probably looks very different than it does today. So yeah, I think it's great that people are kind of snapping lines in the like a chalk line and seeing, what does my environment look like, and being able to use that. I mean, even some of those things where we talk like different subscription IDs. Sometimes, I've seen companies that have hundreds of different subscriptions, and they want to get everything moved into one place. Well, there's nothing that stops you from doing it. I mean, there's some work there. There might be some downtime, right? As you're shutting down your app here and bringing it up. But sure, if you wanted to consolidate, you could look at some things like that too.
Okay, nice, nice.
So there's all
So
kinds of like neat little ancillary benefits you can get beyond just having that kind of disaster recovery or cyber recovery as a service.
yeah, yeah. So you mentioned for like some customer scenario before.
Mhm.
Do you have any other crazy things like from customers which were like a story or a use case they had or things they did, just something else which like probably people
Yeah.
should know about?
Well, actually, so that one I mentioned earlier, so they had an issue. They had an encryption event that happened in their environment, and it basically encrypted their entire Azure environment very quickly. The attackers got in and were able to encrypt everything, and they held that company for ransom. And they were able through Cloud Rewind to bring their entire environment back up, back to before the attack, and then patch it, the hole where the attacker got in, which was compromised credentials.
Okay.
Shocker. In about 36 minutes.
Wow. Okay.
So that's pretty good to be able to go from, all right, we've got a problem, we're fully encrypted. Again, 1,400 plus different Azure resources, and bring it all back up online, patch the holes, fix the credentials in about 36 minutes. That's pretty awesome.
Yeah. I mean, especially if you think like all the stories are out there from customers either on-prem or somewhere at the cloud where they're lights out basically for days or weeks, right? Because they couldn't and then again, there's in many cases, like I've seen, like, okay, the only option they have is to pay. But with this, you're kind of like, okay, you go ahead. We're gonna restore this. And I feel now I feel a little bit sorry for the attacker as well. I probably shouldn't say that, but it's like, oh, you do all this work and then they just go out and restore the whole thing very quickly. I think that's again, I think that's very impressive and obviously a very good story, I think, to have, and very
smile on my face.
Yeah, definitely on mine too. So yeah. So again, we're slowly coming to an end in terms of time. Is there anything else we haven't really talked about, and do you want to make sure that people know about Cloud Rewind or something like that?
I think the big, the only other thing that I haven't really mentioned is around scales, right? When I think about, the scale that Azure provides for customers, when we start talking about hundreds of thousands of different cloud resources, hundreds of petabytes, we have customers that are at that scale that are protecting their cloud resources with Cloud Rewind. So it doesn't matter whether you're small or you're big, and you're the super massive enterprise. The beauty of Cloud Rewind is that it can protect anything. It really can protect any of your cloud resources very easily. No, you don't have to install anything. There's no, scripting, no agents, no run books that you have to worry about. Everything just kind of works. And so I would say, my takeaway, and maybe I'm jumping the gun, is just like, if you're interested in it, just take a trial of it. You can set it up in about 5-10 minutes, and it will go off and discover everything and tell you what you have, and then you pick what you want.
Nice.
It's very, very simple.
Okay, I will definitely check out this for one of my personal projects to actually see how that works, and I will definitely go and sign up for the trial. So for all the others who are now interested to learn more or try it out, where should they go?
Yeah, they can go to commvault.com. And when they're there, they can look for Cloud Rewind, or you can go to your favorite browser of choice and of course, search Commvault Cloud Rewind. I'm sure that you will find it that way as well. And of course, like myself, you can find me on LinkedIn if you're looking for me at Thomas. I think I'm Thomas Bryant, but you can find me if you just search for my name in LinkedIn. So always happy to talk with customers. Always happy to talk with anybody at Microsoft. You all are a fantastic partner to work with.
Awesome. Hey, thank you very much, Thomas. This was a lot of fun again. And I hope we can do this again in the future. Again, for everyone who wants to learn more, I will put the links Thomas mentioned here in the description below. Again, and also include his LinkedIn profile. So make sure you go and connect with him. Thank you very much, Thomas, again. And everyone watching, see you in the next one.
Thank you.